Elijah ran from God's authority. Elijah, his story is a trip because Elijah was he was such a powerful prophet. I mean, God used him in such a powerful way as a prophet, and he did some incredible things. Things that you're like, wow, he had to be walking in authority, his God-given authority, to be able to be used this way. And then it blows me away what happened, but he spoke a prophetic word to the king, to a king. He spoke a prophetic word. It's not like me going up to President Obama right now, because the worst they'll do is put me in jail or whatever. If I said something prophetically to him or something with boldness. But back then, when you would approach a leader that way, you were approaching your possible death. Because you just didn't go up to a leader, or you didn't just go up and tell him anything you wanted, because it could have meant death. But he went up to the king and he said that there will be no dew or rain unless I give the word. He prophesied to the king that there was going to be a major famine, a severe drought. I mean, he was in a brook, in a place where birds came and brought him food. When everybody else was hungry because of the drought, God brought ravens to bring him food. And he was used to display this huge power of God. He had invited all these prophets of Baal. And he told them, and all the children of Israel and all the people of that day in that area, he brought them all together. 450 prophets, including the king and everybody else that lived in that region. And he said, the God that answers by fire is the true God. So the prophets did their thing, and no fire came down, and then he did his thing, and the fire came down. He was walking in authority, so much so that he called down fire from heaven. Fire came from heaven and licked up all that was there, burnt everything up. That's how much authority he was walking in. He had them all slaughtered. All the prophets, he had them killed. That's how much authority he had. He was walking in his authority so much that he said, these guys need to die, and they all died. That to me is an amazing thing. He also was the one that gave the word, Elijah did, gave the word that said that the rain is coming. After 7 years of drought, when he said that, it came. That's authority. That's walking in his authority that God had given him as a prophet. After that moment where all these prophets were slaughtered, the king goes and tells the wife. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah and say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. In other words, I'm going to go and kill you within 24 hours. You're going to be dead. Now watch this. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. He ran all the way from Israel to Beersheba, which is a couple of days' journey. He took off. He was like, man, I don't want to be part of this. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. Verse 4, while he himself went a day's journey into the desert, he came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have enough. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestor. Elijah was confused. He was depressed. He was hopeless. He lost his vision because he had ran from God's authority. He was being used with such authority. So he understood what it was to God's authority. But Jezebel comes and says, I'm going to kill you. And then he got afraid. He left. He ran. And he ran from his authority that God had placed in him. God wanted him to go and confront her. To confront Jezebel. And say, no way, this is God's people. This is God's land, and we're not going to have this. He ran from his authority. He wasn't able to maximize the seeds of greatness that God had implanted into him. I spoke about that a few months back, where the seeds inside of us, there's greatness inside of us, but many of us, they're laying dormant. It's laying stale, stillborn, if you will. And God had raised Elijah to take care of the job. All the prophets of Baal were murdered and slaughtered, but Jezebel raised them back up because Elijah ran. Elijah wasn't walking in his authority. And when we don't walk in our authority, when I wasn't walking in my authority as the pastor of this church, God had called me to do this. He had commissioned me to this. He put something inside of me, a mantle, if you will, to be the pastor of this church, but I didn't receive it. I didn't accept it. I ran from it. Even though it sounds strange, even though I was pastoring, but inside of me, I wasn't exercising the authority of it. I didn't accept the mantle of it. And because Elijah didn't accept the mantle, or he ran from his authority, because of that, the prophets of Baal raised back up. When it was his job, it was God's calling on his life to wipe them out. Hear me, church. It was his calling. Church, you have a calling in your life. There's seeds of greatness inside of you. But my suspicion is that many of you are allowing them to lay dormant inside of you. The seeds of greatness aren't being sprouted out because of various reasons. I'll talk a little bit about what's maybe suppressing them, but I have a suspicion that most of us don't allow those seeds of greatness to come out because we don't walk in our authority. So what God had did, this is kind of going in a different direction, but I just want to kind of finish this. It's a different Bible study, but I'll bring it for today's study. What God did is brought a young man called Elisha. God had called Elijah, with the J, to finish the job, but he ran from it. So then he brought a young man named Elisha. And Elijah, I believe, trained him up for 2 years in how to be the prophet that God had. That mantle that was on Elijah was transferred to Elisha. And God had brought Elisha to confront Jezebel and get rid of the prophets. Let me tell you something. If you don't exercise the authority that you have, if you don't allow those seeds of greatness to come out of you, God will call someone else to do it. If we don't exercise what God has called us to do, God will bring someone else to do it. Church, I do not want God to bring anybody else for my calling. I want to live in my calling. I want to surround myself with God so much so that I'm not intimidated or afraid of walking in my authority that God has called me to do. And God had brought Elisha, and you know what? Elisha finished the job. There was no more Baal worship after Elisha. Church, God is calling us this morning to walk in our authority that was given to us by Christ.